A good Rosh Chodesh to all of our viewers and listeners. Rosh Chodesh Shvat. Shvat is Rosh Tevis, Shadei Besuras Tevis. We should only have great news for the entire Klal Yisrael. It should be wonderful tidings of salvation, redemption for the entire Jewish people and for every single individual among the Jewish people. The title of the shir, insofar as contemporary issues is concerned, is Mercy Misplaced. That's the title, and of course it's very applicable to 99.9% of the world today. By way of introduction, we should like to start with the Rambam in Hilchos Teshuvah, Perek Shvi, the 7th chapter, Halacha Gimel. And the Rambam says, "Val toimal she'ena teshuvah ela maveir sheish behem ma'aseh." A person should not think, in other words, he should not be misled to think that repentance from sin only applies to actions, only certain actions that a person did that was prohibited. And the Rambam says it explicitly: immorality, robbery, theft, that involves actions, biodayim, only that the Torah required a person should change and regret and do tshuva and do penitence. No, it's not true, says the Rambam. Kishem shetzorach adam loshav meilu kach utzorach lechapes b'deyos royes sheyesh loy v'loshav mehem. Likewise, a person has to undergo self-introspection, a deep soul-searching, and try to focus on his bad character traits. And he must also do tshuva from them. He has to change his inner personality, his pnimius hanefesh. For example, the Rambam says, "Min hakas, u'min ha'evo, u'min ha'kinu, u'min ha'tacharus, u'min ha'hisul, u'min redifas ha'momoin v'ha'kovoi, u'min redifas ha'macholos v'chayotzei bohem. Min ha'kol tzorech lachzor b'tshuva." A person, after self-introspection and self-incrimination, he indeed searched, he found bad character traits, he has to ameliorate them. No question about it, such as unjustifiable anger or scorning, mocking his friend in his heart, somehow or other carrying a grudge against somebody, degrees of hating somebody else, and of course pursuing wealth, pursuing indulgence by way of consumption of foods. All of these must a person grapple with the fact that he has these bad inclinations and character traits and try to improve that, ameliorate. If you can eradicate them, it's wonderful. And the Rambam concludes, it's quite a famous statement. It was basically taken as a very cornerstone of modern psychology. The Rambam says his famous statement that was quoted numerous times, "Veilu avonos kosher miyoytzish be'maisa, v'zman she'odov nishka beilu kosher hu lifroish mehem." And these character traits, unfortunately, are much more difficult to ameliorate, to change, if a person, God forbid, is corrupted by them. So the corruption and the subsequent instilling in his personality these traits, his very inner personality has become corroded with these bad traits, and therefore, even if he decides to undergo an upheaval of his inner personality, undertake arduous, laborious effort to change, extremely difficult. Why? Because he has become addicted to these character traits. Insofar as actions are concerned, the person does not necessarily become addicted. Even through repetition, through habits, it is easier, relatively speaking, to change by simply disengaging in action that he engaged in before. So this type of recoil and disengagement from the physical realm, from prohibited actions, is more accessible and available to a person than type of character traits that are deeply implanted in him. It's a type of addiction, says the Rambam, that it's difficult indeed to eliminate them. That's the famous Rambam. As we said, this is no more than an introduction. What is the point of the Rambam? So the Rambam is telling us something very important. Of course, this basically relates to Judgment Day, although not necessarily exclusively, but it does relate within a context of a person when he is about to, so to speak, face a tribunal panel of judges. So we see that a person, according to the Rambam, is judged, he goes to trial, and could be he will be punished, could be he'll be rewarded if he changed these character traits. And instead of having disjunctive emotions, he has constructive emotions. So if he will be condemned on Judgment Day, it's a possibility that we say he'll be acquitted, and it could be he'll even be rewarded. So reward and punishment are not only relegated to his deeds, and if his deeds are noble, as you said a moment ago, he will surely be rewarded. Nevertheless, he will be condemned for not disavowing unworthy emotions. For simply in the course of the day, the Beichen Levavos knows which kind of thoughts he had, and he will also be condemned for not dismissing ignoble thoughts and for surely embracing a wrong perspective and worldview. On occasion, we have an individual that actually cultivates, like in our days, disjunctive emotions. So the Rambam reiterates that a person is not only judged by his deeds, but by his inner life as well. All of his thoughts in the course of the day or night, even his feelings, his emotions, his sentiments, all come within the focus of judgment. And of course, we all know, as Rebbe Lopian said, Rebbe Lopian once asked the Bachar, how would you define, from a Jewish perspective, freedom of will? Freedom of will, that's the basics of the entire Torah, as the Rambam says. If there would not be freedom of will, we would believe in determinism. So then the entire concept of reward and punishment becomes null and nullified, because if somebody commits transgressions, he actually sins. So he has a perfect excuse. He can justify it because that's the way the Hashgacha Elyoina predetermined his character, his personality. He can't help himself. He has to do egregious deeds. He has to have immoral thoughts. What would be the point of giving him a reward if he does mitzvahs? If he's kind, that's the way HaKadosh Baruch Hu created him. It's determined. Everything is predetermined. So that, of course, was denied by Judaism. The Torah denied it. And as a chaim, as a mothers, you have a choice to choose life over death, a life of blessing over a life of curses. Use your freedom of choice in the metaphysical, moral, ethical realm and choose life. So they asked a Bacher, what's the definition of Bacharta B'chaim? So the Bacher said, it's the God-given ability, it's a present that God bestowed upon man to do as he likes to do. So Rabbi Lopian corrected him and said that is true insofar as the animal is concerned. The animal does its own thing. Whatever it decides to do, one day it decides to do like this, tomorrow it decides to do the opposite. But by a human being, his freedom of choice is his inner ability. It's indeed a present, a gift. God's unique gift to mankind. It's the ability to do what he doesn't want to do and not to do what he does want to do. Because a man is composed of two diametrically opposed elements. On the one hand, the Gemara said, Rabbi Lopian quoted the Gemara in Eruvin that he is angelic. He's a spiritual being. He has, like the Sfas Emes always said, an aspect of divinity in his soul. There's an element of sanctity in his soul. When he created man, created him with the breath of divinity. So he has a divine element in him. So he's really similar to an angel, and he can only decide to do good. On the other hand, he's also Daimetu Abein. He has functions of an animal. So he has a biological being. He has a physical being that the drives and urges of his physical, biological being. He has tremendous drives and urges to do what he wants to do. To live like an animal. Not any oil, not any yoke whatsoever. And such a person, if he chooses to do what he wants to do, so then good and bad become convertible. Today, good, so far as doing your own thing, consists of this, of X, and tomorrow it consists of Y. We believe that good and bad are not convertible. Not everything that is popular is right, and not everything that is right is popular. We believe morality was granted by HaKadosh Baruch Hu to the Jewish people and to all of mankind. And if we don't fulfill this great mission that HaKadosh Baruch Hu placed upon us, so we lose our right to exist in this world, because this world is also not our world. It's a world that was consecrated to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So therefore, Judaism strongly believed in the power of free will, that a man can not only regulate his actions, but he can regulate his inner drive. And all modern Jewish philosophers, as well as the philosophers of the medieval ages, always pointed out to the Even Ezra. The Even Ezra basically says this, black or white. Even Ezra says a person is not only capable, not only does he have the capacities to disengage, to abstain from murder, theft, perjury, forgery, from inflicting evil acts on other people, but he's also capable of staying away, of divesting himself from hate, from jealousy, from base, uncouth desires, drives, and urges. Ibn Ezra says, but I hate somebody, but I covet what somebody else has. So the Torah tells you don't covet, but I can't help myself. I see somebody else has a beautiful home and I don't. He has fine paintings, he has a beautiful car, the latest style. I don't have that, so I desire that. And it hits me automatically. It's not something which I predetermined in my mindset that I should desire. It happens by itself. So how can I disown myself of these desires and urges? Because you have Bechira Chavshis. A man is not only a master of his deeds, but also of all of his feelings and all of his sentiments. And there's no apology, like the Rambam says. There's no apology. A person has to do tshuva from this. There's no extenuating circumstances. I know a person can say, I can't help myself, but I covet, I desire, I hate. A person has to realize that he's in total control. He's in the driver's seat in the entire kaleidoscope of emotions, feelings, thoughts, spiritual vibrations, and therefore he is held responsible for all of his thoughts of jealousy of others' possessions, of coveting somebody else's property or possessions, for hating people, for finding malicious joy in somebody else's defeat. And yet HaKadosh Baruch Hu is very liberal, and he will reward man if he changes his inner world and divests himself of all disjunctive feelings and only has midas taivas, and he'll even reward, says the Chayvus Levavis, a mother for loving her child. Can a mother help herself? Ask the Chayvus Levavis. She can't. She must love her child. So she reached beautiful, divine, noble emotions. Why should she get rewarded for this? It's very natural. Doesn't have to work hard. There's no laborious effort of having to undergo an inner world upheaval. Answer is, true, she must love her child. But if she's capable of love for her child, she's also capable of loving others as well. And therefore, the Jewish people have always worked to become, they've strived to reach the great aspirations that their inner thoughts and their inner feelings should be worthy, should be good, and they should surely be deserving, even though they're not doing it on this condition, of being rewarded because they have become angelic people. This is basically the yesod of the Rambam. We perhaps elaborated on it a little bit too long, but this is the yesod of the Rambam. So therefore, it would come to us with a shock that we worked so hard to have a pure, pristine inner world, of having pure feelings, emotions, and sentiments of love and other things, that all of a sudden we are called upon to hate, despise, but not hate superficially, but with a depth. How is that possible? So we should quote the original pasuk in Yeshaya Nov. Our tefillah quotes a lot of psukim from Novi. Nevertheless, on occasion, there is a redaction, there's a change. In the first bracha after Baruch Hu, we say Yetzer Oyer v'Verei Chayshech, we say Shalom v'Rei Sakeh. Kadosh Baruch Hu forms light, creates darkness, he makes peace, and he created everything. This pasuk was taken from Yeshaya Novi, 45th chapter. And there it says, Yetzer Oyer v'Verei Chayshech, we say Shalom v'Rei Sakeh, u'Verei Ro. Ani Hashem Oiseh Kol Eila. So the Chazal simply changed the word in this sentence and supplanted the word evil with all things. Of course, it's much easier, more palatable to us not to say that God creates evil. However, that is exactly what the pasuk says. And the simple meaning is that there's evil in the world. Nobody knows it better than the Jewish people. So first and foremost, what do we learn from this pasuk in its original form? Evil does exist. And evil is bad. We don't want to depress people, disorient them, so the Chazal changed it to Beri Sakom. But the original pasuk is as it is. The world is not free from deformities. It is not free from cosmic destruction in the physical sense. There will be volcanoes that will explode. There will be tsunamis, earthquakes. There will be disease. There will be all types of evils that will descend. And these are evils. We don't live in Never Land. And there is going to always be a discord, an antinomy between our self-preserving interests, the self-preserving interests of people, and unfortunately, the unalterable laws of nature, which consist of tragedies, consist of disasters, natural disasters. So the reality of evil is indisputable. Evil exists. And due to the fact that people do have free will, so there are individuals that whatever reason they have can choose to be animals. They also have free will. Yet they choose to do whatever they want to do. I'll do my own thing. They have minds, so they might rationalize it. They might invent things that are not true. They're irresponsible people, like Sartre said. And the irresponsibility of people created anti-Semitism. And Jean-Paul Sartre said that there would not be a Jewish people in the world. So these type of people that look to blame their inadequacies and their failures, they can't accept responsibility and say they're at fault. They're to blame, change heroically, so they blame it on the Jewish people. But they would have been theoretically possible then to blame it on somebody else. Jewish people are a convenient scapegoat. It's irrational. As Sartre pointed out in anti-Semitism, and he said it, nobody could say it better than him, that somebody who actually believes with his whole heart that Yoshke Pandra never lived, still believed the Jews killed him. Totally irrational. So what did Judaism and the Torah have to say is the response. So, of course, we can never acquiesce to evil. We can never accept it. We can't be indifferent to it. Indifference is the worst. It's as if you're making peace with it and accepting it. What is the order of the day? To the best of our ability, from the depth of our soul, and whatever is available to us, availability of it, not all avenues are available to us, but active opposition and constant defiance to evil has to be employed. all means that's at man's disposal that we have available to us has to be utilized. The Torah has endorsed as a mitzvah medical assistance, scientific assistance, if God forbid there's some sort of pathological occurrence insofar as the health of the world is concerned, there's a plague or individual sickness. So a person is obligated not to accept it, to defy it, and he must, the Taz says, medical treatment and cures are a chiyuv. Person has to combat evil. We have our intellect, and we try to the best of our ability to control interests, our own interests and needs through availing ourselves of everything that's available. So active opposition is necessary. In contemporary times, we have to demonstrate our defiance. It has to be active. We can't just say a kapitel of Tehillim. If we say a kapitel of Tehillim, it's very good, but it has to be with emotions. It has to be with an unbelievable, I would say, creation of hatred against the enemies of humanity and civilization. They should be wiped off the face of the earth. They should fall totally, and their pieces should be spread to all four corners of heaven, never to have this curse return to earth. It has to be with the depth. It's of course difficult, as we mentioned a moment ago. That was the purpose for the elongated introduction. It goes totally contrary to our aspirations of being good, ethical, moral people. However, under these circumstances, we cannot in any way accept any other policy. We can't accept the policy preached by Gandhi and afterwards Nehru, and also of the American government, to simply resist evil passively, to appease Iran, not to accept it. What we know what happened when the English government at the time decided to appease Hitler and give him Czechoslovakia. Once we do that, so it's the first step in the destruction of the entire world. We have to engage in active combat. And the difficulty is for people like us, and it's very difficult, no question about it, whose our entire realm of ideas and feelings are always to reach high moral standards. And all of a sudden, we have to transform ourselves. Every day, we have to demonstrate, protest, defy the evils that are being perpetrated against the Jewish people. Regardless of what circumstances we find ourselves in, we have to try to do the maximum. We cannot continue our regular normal lives. And this is due exclusively to our high, lofty standards of religiosity, ethicism, and morality. Because only the loftiest ethical people are capable of a fiery spiritual spark that will ignite in our inner personality an outburst of hatred against any wrongdoing, and this will always be the constant expression of a soul that loves what's right and what HaKadosh Baruch Hu wanted us to do. From the religious soul emanates a feeling of total indignation against this cruelty, depravity that's committed against the Jewish people. There should be no misplaced mercy. The Hag and all of its allies are the ones that are interested in genocide. The Jewish people sacrificed their lives in order to save a few Arabs. The soldiers are the greatest, most courageous, or among the greatest, most courageous, heroic people of all time. People that are non-religious, somehow or other have a deep faith in HaKadosh Baruch Hu that this is what is necessary to do. This is God's will, and they go be'eshu b'mayim to save the Jewish people. They don't have the protection of the Air Force anymore. That first and foremost wiped out the enemy to the best that they can, and then the ground offensive could take place. No. And how did one of the captives who was released recently, what did she say? She had 54 days of total Zaymadur again. Every second she was taunted, ridiculed, scorned, mocked. We're going to kill you. The wife, the husband, the children. She was in civilian home. I would not be able to continue to even say what she said. If you take off 80%, we would chalish away. We would simply faint. Indignation. She said everybody's a terrorist here. That's why they were indoctrinated. And we paid for it. 3,000. Clear evidence, 3,000 teachers that the monies they get, their payroll is funded by the UN before there was a ground offensive, before there was even a plan to undertake a ground offensive in Gaza. So what happened? They signed clear declaration that they're celebrating what happened on October 7th. It's a source of celebration. Depravity of humanity by teachers, that their role is to teach how to be a human being, how to live in a civilization. So they were the first ones, instead of condemning it, praised what the Hamas did. Not only did they praise it, they celebrated. It's if we wouldn't have evidence, we would never believe such a thing. And it's interesting what we heard from the Chidushei Arim. We'll go back to the Parshas HaShavua and the Parshas that we're learning, and we'll conclude with that. In the Bris Bein Absarim, which established the side of the Jewish peoples, and the Rebbeinu Shalom told Avraham Avinu, "Tigel yeh zaracho beretz v'loy lohem ve'avodum v'inu oisam arba me'ot shana." The Jewish people will be the select people. Don't worry, Avraham Avinu. Your children will be the chosen people, but it's only going to be realized through travail, through suffering, affliction, in the course of 400 years. After 400 years of sorrows and miseries that your grandchildren will have to endure, then you will go forth as a great nation. Rechush Gadol, you'll go forth as the chosen people. And we know that it was only 210 years. Medrash in Shir Hashirim on the pasuk Deidi. Zebo medale galehorim mekabetz alakvoyes was said on Yetzias Mitzrayim. Shigulo oiso bedilug ubekfitzo midale meyoishono to 210 years. So Kadosh Baruch Hu accelerated it, and the Chazal explained it was bekfitzo. It jumped from 400 to 210. So the question naturally arises that Kadosh Baruch Hu said 400 years, and the Kadosh Baruch Hu was well aware of what's going to take place in the future. So how is it? Rambam asked the question, it was predetermined, why should they be punished at all? So the Ravid quotes the Chazal. The Ravid is in Hilchos Tshuva Perek Vov Halacha Hey. Ki habeirei Omar, Kadosh Baruch Hu predetermined Yetzias Mitzrayim. V'avon v'hinos avdal me'yoshana, but not Koshi Hashibud. V'hem ovdu bohem beporech v'himisu ben. They killed Jewish children. They killed Jewish people. That was not part of the decree of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. They went above and beyond. Like it says in Zechariah, Tzafti Mat, I established that the affliction should be a little. They mozru ro, and they increased it manifold times. And the subhuman cruelty that the Mitzrayim subjugated the Bnei Yisrael completed 400 years of affliction in 210 years. The qualitative difference in what was decreed and what was implemented by the Mitzrayim. So this made it into 210 years. In other words, the purification and the purging. Like the Riyah Kodesh said, the catharsis, purification from all the negative qualities and the Nishmas Yisrael should have taken 400 years, was accelerated to 210 years because of the Koshi Hashibud. So the Chidush Harim asked the question, the destination of Kal Yisrael from Eretz, right, Eretz Yisrael, the destination from Mitzrayim of the Klal was Eretz Yisrael. Nevertheless, Rashi quotes the Chazal, HaKadosh Baruch Hu does not drive out an evil nation from Eretz Yisrael until the completion of 400 years worth of sin. The Dar Revi Yoshuvein, or the fourth generation, will return to Eretz Yisrael. Kiloi Sholem Avoinu Emoiri Adheino. So Rashi says Kiloi Sholem Avoinu Emoiri Liyos Mishtaleach Miyartza Doisei Asman Shein HaKadosh Baruch Hu Nifra Moat Shenispalei Asal. HaKadosh Baruch Hu now punish the Goyim in Eretz Yisrael until they have sinned to the extent that they're not worthy to remain. And that will take 400 years. We know that Klal Yisrael was supposed to come back there to Israel after 210 years. They sojourned in the Midbar another 40 years, and they came back after 250 years. The return only took 250. And yet the Rashbam says, B'derech HaPshat, Adar is Meya Shana, Dar Revi, the fourth generation. Every generation is 100 years, like it says in the Seches Eidias. Abba Meyos is Dalid Doiros, V'lo Sholem Zmana Peiroyim Shani Osed Li'ipora, Elav Min HaMeiroyim B'choytem Arheino, Dal Me'oshono. And I cannot punish them totally until they deserve punishment, which means sinning for 400 years. So even though we have an answer vis-a-vis Israel, how did the Jewish people diminish 400 years to 210 years? But what about the Emorim? What about the Zayin Umois in Eretz Israel? They did not complete the amount of sins necessary for being punished and driven out of Israel, out of Eretz Israel. So the Chidush Harim said, we don't have any other answers. The Ravid says one answer, Koshi Hashibud, the increase in the affliction. So we have to assume this is also the answer for the Zayin Amanim. What does that mean? So the Chidush Yorim said, so was transmitted Torah Shebal Peh. But the Zainamim who inhabited Eretz Israel at the time that the Jewish people were being afflicted in Egypt, they were Shchenim, neighbors to Mitzrayim, who committed atrocities with cruelty, depravity, and brutality that was unheard of from Sheshes Yimei Bereshis, even in Sdoim. Yet the Zainamim were totally indifferent, apathetic, stood by silently without protesting against the utterly evil actions of the Mitzrayim, who engaged in the worst, Kaishi Hashibud. So that also completed 400 years of Averis. In other words, had they done actions, Maisim, it would have taken 400 years. But this was so egregious, the silence in the face of Kaishi Hashibud of the Mitzrayim. So this completed 400 years of Averis, of Kum V'aseh, of actively doing transgressions, to 210 years. That is the chet, the worst possible chet of silence in the face of evil. So with their total silence, the Rishis HaGoyim ledger was accelerated, intensified at 210 years, was Sholem Avonei Movi. It's as if they had sinned egregiously for 400 years. The tacit endorsement of evil, personified like the Chazal said, Mideshosik Shmamino de Nicholei, this deafening silence, so it's a sign that you approve of what's going on. And it's interesting the way the Shabina Rav and the Brisker Rav both said, Omar Reb Chia bar Abba, Omar Rabbi Simoy. We're running a little bit late, we'll just conclude. Shloisha Oyu Boy says there were three people that were responsible. There were three people that were involved in the judicial forum that we have today in The Hague. There were three people that were involved in that. What should we do to the Bnei Yisrael? Let's deal cunningly with them. And the Chazal tell us, Gemara in Sotah Daf Yud Aleph, Bilam Shiyoatz, Bilam was the one that advised for Kaishi Hashibud, Nerag, he was killed. Eoy Sheshosak, Eoy that was silent, Nidam B'Yisurin, was afflicted with terrible suffering. For Yisra Shebarach, Yisra ran away, Zochu Bonov, Shiesha Belishkas Hagozis, his children merited to be, his grandchildren merited to be part of the Sanhedrin Hagodol. And the Brisker Rav, Shabina Rav both asked the question. If Eoiv was Shaisek, he was silent after Paro decreed, based on the judicial forum, we will deal exceedingly evil with the Jewish people, so he ran away. In other words, Yisra ran away. So Eob, that was Shosak, that was silent, he was needed to be certain he suffered. What could he have done? Yisra is a proof that you couldn't change Paro's mind because he had to run away. So that's a Raya Brura Kashemesh. That's a proof. That's as clear as the sun that there was nothing to do. Bilam's advice was taken wholeheartedly. Paro was not willing to hear anybody else. So why was he punished with Yisurim? So the Brisker Rav answered in Yiddish, if it hurts, you scream. will ask Yiyov, what are you screaming? So he says, I'm suffering. So what kind of benefit will you have from the tza'akos, from your crying, screaming? Do you have some sort of benefit from that? So Eov would answer, but if it hurts you, you scream. It's a natural reaction. It's part of nature. A woman's about to give birth, doesn't take an epidural, she'll scream. So that's why I'm screaming. There's no benefit, but it's an expression of the nature of man or woman. So that's the midah keneged midah. Yes. If Hava Nischak Maloi and the Eitzah of Biloim would have hurt you, you would have screamed, even though there's no toyeles, there's no benefit in screaming. You could not change Paro's mind, but it would be an indicator that it hurts you. Eoiv did not protest, did not demonstrate, did not express pain, indignation, anger, hatred of such an evil edict. Yisro distanced himself. He stayed silent. And in this silence, insofar as Hava Nischak Maloi in the matter making evil decree against the Jewish people is a betrayal of total moral values. Bankruptcy, which is the term, total bankruptcy of morality, which is now being used by the American Congress, the Educational Committee, insofar as the presidents of the Poison Ivy League colleges is concerned. During the times of Hitler, the Jewish people had to endure such rishus from Hitler and Stalin. And the world was different than it was in the time of Paroi, because the Zayin Amamim passively stood by and did nothing. It was Begeder Shevi Al Taisa. That was in times of power. In World War II, nations of the world, including the Catholic Church, actively supported the extermination of the entire Jewish people in Europe, who indeed faced mortal danger of total extinction, in toto. And that's what we have today. But today, people are more courageous. And we have to remember that we have to express our indignation totally. And the Sayim, to conclude on a good word, we just like to mention the Eretz Chemda of the Malbim, who asked the contradiction. The Marsha also asked this contradiction. Omal Rav Yehuda, great is a feast that through a feast bring in strange people so they become your close friends. Where do you learn it from? From Yisro. Told his daughters, call Moshe and let him partake of a repast, of a suda, of a meal. Zachu bon of leishe belishkas agozis. So his grandchildren were zeicha to sit in lishkas agozis. So the Marsha asked the question. We see on the one hand, Yisro was rewarded that his grandchildren sit in lishkas agozis because of him running away as fast as possible from Hava Nischak, distancing himself from the bad eitzah, not to be involved in it. And over here we see, because of his generosity in trying to be Mekarev Moshe, so his grandchildren rewarded Leishe B'Lishkas HaGosis. Stira. So the great Eretz Chemda of the Malbim answers, I'll be the Medrash. Im Zocha Hager. But his Baruch says, what does it mean? He loves a ger to give him bread. Im zacha hager yotzemen kayanim gedolim. Shalom lechem aponim. Shema ve'elozol. Lokach loy mibnois putiel. V'seiled es Pinchas Elazar, who was the son of Aaron, married one of the daughters of Putiel of Yisrael. Yotza mimenu kayanim gedolim. Pinchas and all the kayanim. So the oyeves again, lo says lechem means lechem upon him. So the great Malbim said it was midah connected midah. Everything was proportional. The reward was proportional to the good deed. And he says as follows: we know from the Chazal, the Lishkas Hagozis, Hara Moiriya, Chetzia b'Kodesh v'Chetzia b'Choil. It was half Kodesh, half was holy, and half was not holy. Chetzia HaKodesh, that's where the Beis Hamikdash was. Ochlu lechem upon him. Midah keneged midah. He worried that somebody else should be fed. So HaKadosh Baruch Hu will feed his great-grandchildren from lechem upon him every Shabbos. Midah keneged midah. And therefore it says, Zochu bonov leishepim. This God's children, grandchildren, genealogy, merited to sit b'lishkas HaGoz. Like Taisa says, even though only Malchei Beis David, the kings that emanate from Beis David, have a right to sit in the Azara, but to eat lechem upon him, the Kohanim also have a right. B'schar shebarach, from a judicial issue, Zocha bonav leishe b'lishkas hagozis. Which lishkas hagozis? That was situated b'choil, because Sanhedrin HaGadol were located next to the Beis Hamikdash. So his great-grandchildren were Zeicha Leishev, because Dayanim b'yeshiva, they sit down Dayanim. Leishev b'lishkas hagozis v'divrei pichacham chaim.